You've got Skyrim's cool magic, amazing dragons, pure fantasy overload. You got The Witcher 3 stylish magic, monster hunts, a dark world packed with lore. Then there's Kingdom Come Deliverance. No magic, no dragons, hardly any budget. Just a group of hungry Chet developers trying to build the most historically accurate RPG ever made, which back then sounded absurd, but not to one man named Dan Vara. You see, Dan had already made hits, Mafia, Mafia 2. The dude had industry respect, a stable, high-paying job. With his credentials, he could get hired anywhere and have a nice retirement. But something kept clawing at him. He couldn't sleep. He kept dreaming of a game no studio would ever greenlight. He wanted full control, no shortcuts, no corporate filters. And to make it real, he'll have to give up everything. While everyone else was chasing the next Skyrim, Dan was chasing something real. Medieval life, brutal combat, starvation, politics, pain. And somehow it worked. Which leads us to how it all started. Dan and a handful of Chet veterans came together around a single vision. A medieval RPG with no spells, no monsters, no chosen ones, just brutal realism set in 1403 Bohemia. Everyone thought he was insane. Publishers laughed him out the room. Where's the magic? Where's the hook? Nobody wants to be a peasant with no powers, they said. But Dan didn't stop. After all, he founded a team that believed in the same thing, a different kind of RPG. And they weren't aiming low. Warhorse Studios wanted to blend the mechanics of Skyrim, the storytelling of The Witcher, the grounded world of Mount and Blade, and the brutal combat of Dark Souls. Their target? The kind of players who love Game of Thrones and Vikings, but wanted to live it, not just watch it. But there was one problem. Doing all this was expensive. They had a private investor, but with a catch. To unlock the full funding, they had to raise $500,000 on their own. This was a little harder to do because at the time, mobile and free-to-play MMOs were exploding. Investors were convinced console RPGs were dead. Why fund a $60 medieval sim when microtransactions were making millions off iPads? Some publishers even suggested they pivot to a free-to-play MMO just to survive. Despite all this, they decided to start a Kickstarter. This was truly make or break for Kingdom Come Deliverance. They put everything into that campaign, a cinematic pitch, a low-funded prototype, and Dan staring down the camera telling the world no dragons, no magic, just history. And somehow it caught fire. Over 1.1 million raised, 35,000 backers, a demo that barely ran, but people wanted it. And they kept players updated, releasing dev diaries, showing early builds, sharing raw behind-the-scenes footage. This wasn't just development, it was collaboration. Now they had just enough to make the game, but not enough to survive if they failed. Dan wasn't your ordinary creative. He didn't need millions, just a little hope, even if it meant walking through agony. Because raising money, that was just a prologue. The real war began the moment they opened CryEngine. See, CryEngine was built for first-person shooters, tight corridors, controlled AI, linear levels. Trying to build a living, breathing Bohemia inside it? Wow, that is not easy. And yet they still tried. Right from the start, sacrifices had to be made. Not everything survived the transition from dream to design. Massive cinematic battles? Scrapped. The engine couldn't handle that. Too many soldiers on screen. A fully explorable silver mining city? Pulled from the map entirely. They just didn't have the time or budget to build it. Branching side quests that changed based on your reputation? Scaled back to avoid breaking the main story. They were bleeding resources faster than they could replace them. There were only about 3 dozen devs, no roadmap, just gray box prototypes. And one obsession Dan kept repeating: no magic, no shortcuts. If it didn't exist in 1403, we don't ship it. That obsession didn't stop with systems. Even the combat was built from real history. Warhorse Studios even took it a step further and went to historical battle reenactments, interviewed living history experts and studied fencing manuals. Then they brought in real swordsmen and fencing champions, not just to choreograph, but to motion capture actual techniques. They wanted to know, how does it look from the eyes of a fighter when you actually stab, block, or get hit? The team also didn't just motion capture real swordsmen, they had to reinvent the whole system. They couldn't rely on flashy animation sets or predictable combos like Skyrim. Kingdom Come had varied elevation, awkward weapon sizes, and weird angles that no canned animation could cover. So Warhorse built a smart system that combined physics, animation tools, and procedural logic just to control what happens after your sword hits someone. And that obsession with realism didn't stop at combat. It extended to the world itself, especially the people living in it. This wasn't a game full of cardboard cutouts standing still until you showed up. In Skyrim, the blacksmith wakes, hammers, sells, and sleeps, like clockwork. But in Kingdom Come, he's a living person with a real life. If he's not at the forge, you'll have to track him down. Warhorse built their own AI engine completely from scratch on top of CryEngine, just to make that kind of realism possible. Where most NPCs in other games loop through 2 to 3 idle animations, Kingdom Come scripted every named NPC with a full 24-hour routine. A farmer might pull out a gardening tool at 9 AM, go fishing at noon, and head to the tavern by sundown. All without a single line of dialogue triggering it. No cutscene, no scripted triggers, just daily life written into the bones of the game. But pulling it off wasn't easy. Remember, they only had a few dozen devs. No big studio to handle bug testing or fix every edge case. The moment one AI broke, it could destroy an entire town's schedules. Quests would collapse, shops would stay closed, NPCs would disappear. And then there was no roadmap, no example to follow. Skyrim had Radiant AI. Other studios used crowd simulation or hard-coded scenes. Warhorse, they were inventing a new way to simulate life from scratch and hoping it didn't fall apart under its own weight. You see this NPC? This is his brain. It keeps branching and branching. It looks very complicated to the point it makes your head hurts. This is why most RPGs fake it, but Kingdom Come doesn't. And that's what makes it so immersive. And it wasn't just the systems or the AI, even the performances were handcrafted to feel real. Dan said the game included 60 hours of fully voiced dialogue and 3.5 hours of motion captured cutscenes, performed by over 50 actors. He personally auditioned more than 200 people across Prague and London just to find the right voices for Bohemia.
Don't even talk to me about it. He's all done in. I never saw so much blood come out of anyone's anus before.
And that raised a new challenge. What kind of English should they speak? British, American, something else entirely? Warhorse debated every detail because the wrong dialect could kill the immersion. Warhorse spent weeks debating this, even asking players. Eventually they landed on a kind of gritty Shakespearean middle ground, accessible enough to understand, but authentic enough to feel period appropriate. But they didn't stop there. Each actor's face was scanned 24 times, letting the animators generate 60 different expressions to make conversations feel raw, human, and grounded. Every piece was handcrafted, every detail obsessed over. Then after years of struggle, their hard work finally seemed to be paying off. And then it launched.
Oh my god!
Shit.
That's so creepy.
Fucking terrifying. Holy shit.
They're all T-posing.
That dude's also there like,
Oh!
It was a mess. Guards stuck in doorways, glitched NPCs, broken quests, floating horses, crashing menus. It wasn't polished, it wasn't stable, but somehow it still hit. It topped Steam's bestseller list on release day, with peak concurrent players of nearly 96,000, exceeding Skyrim's own launch peak on the platform. Within just 2 days, the game sold 500,000 copies, including 300,000 on Steam and over 1 million units within 2 weeks. Kingdom Come Deliverance launched like a miracle held together with duct tape. But the team at Warhorse, they didn't walk away. At launch, they dropped a massive 25GB day one patch. And it didn't stop there. They rewrote stealth mechanics, rebalanced perks, fixed broken quest logic, and by patch 1.5, it actually worked. Console performance got smoother, NPC schedules stopped imploding, lockpicking was less of a nightmare. If you ask me, it still kinda is. But then came the DLC. Not lazy content drops, but full expansions. From the Ashes lets you rebuild a village from scratch. Band of Bastards threw you into gritty mercenary chaos. A Woman's Lot gave you a new perspective, a new protagonist. Sirhan's Capon's adventures literally turned into the world's most medieval rom-com. Eventually, they dropped modded tools, hardcore mode, and bundled everything into the Royale Edition. So while the launch was chaos, what came after was something rare in gaming. Redemption through real work. The fixes helped, but that's not what actually kept people around. You see, this was a world that didn't just look real, it acted real, and surviving it felt like a triumph in itself. You were just Henry, a blacksmith's son. No powers, no armor, no destiny. You bled in every fight, starved when you couldn't find food, slept in barns, failed quests, even basic systems made you earn it. Repairing your weapon wasn't just a menu. You had to control the grindstone yourself, rotate it, balance the pressure, angle the blade. Mess it up, you'll ruin your weapon. Alchemy wasn't automatic either. You physically ground herbs, steered them in sequence, and boiled mixtures by hand, like a medieval chemistry lab with real rules. It didn't feel like a game trying to entertain you. It felt like a world that didn't care if you survive. And that's exactly what made it immersive. You see, Kingdom Come Deliverance wasn't about escape, it was about survival and the mindset that comes with it. You weren't chasing glory, you were chasing bread. Every coin felt earned, every bowl of stew felt like relief. Because this wasn't just the first RPG where you could starve, it was one of the first where starvation actually mattered. Ignore hunger, your vision blurred, your reflex slowed. It wasn't just a stat, it was a punishment. And that design philosophy bled into everything. Take stealth. You weren't just crouching in shadows. Your clothes determined your sound profile. Chainmail, loud. Thick boots, loud. But dressed like a peasant in soft cloth, your footsteps were light like a feather. Even your armor could betray you. Players loved how every system, sound, food, clothing, weight was connected to one idea: survive or suffer. This was realism with intent, a game that didn't give you tools to win, it gave you reasons to be afraid. Players loved how every fight in Kingdom Come Deliverance felt personal. You weren't some fantasy badass mowing down enemies. You were bleeding, scrambling, barely making out alive. You were a blacksmith's son, barely trained, bleeding for every inch. Combat had combos, but they weren't easy. You had to memorize directions, manage stamina, and read your opponent. Miss a step, you'll get punished hard. Enemies didn't scale, they didn't play fair. A lucky strike could cripple you, and most of the time, running wasn't an option. Trust me, I know, I got 1,000+ hours. And even when you had the upper hand, it didn't mean a thing, not if you brought the wrong weapon. You see, in other games, it doesn't really matter what you hit an enemy with. A sword is a sword, a bow is a bow, damage is damage. But in Kingdom Come Deliverance, you could shoot an armored knight in the chest with an arrow, and it would bounce off. Because that plate wasn't just cosmetic, it was real protection, molded with actual ballistic resistance. And then suddenly now, your entire approach had to change. Light enemies, swords, stabs, and slashes worked fine. But if you ran into someone with full plates, you needed blunt force, maces, warhammers, weapons that dented, shattered, or broke bones through armor. Your longsword might look cool, but in the wrong fight, it was less effective. All of this was physics based. If your angle was off, if your sword missed a vulnerable spot, you got nothing but sparks. Every fight made you think, what armor are they wearing? What am I carrying? And do I even have a chance? Should I subscribe to the void? Players loved it because this wasn't hack and slash. This was medieval combat, where using the wrong weapon could get you killed. And if bleeding in combat wasn't enough, just wait until you commit a crime. Kingdom Come Deliverance didn't play around with morality. There were no karma meters, no press X to redeem yourself. If you stole something, people remembered. If you got caught, guards didn't just yell, they chased, searched, beat you, fined you. Sometimes they dragged you to jail. And your reputation actually mattered. Steal too much in one town, shopkeepers refused to deal with you. Show up filthy, they'll
Mother of
comment
God,
about it.
you look like you've been assaulted.
Your crimes didn't follow you across Bohemia, they stayed where you made them. What you did in Rattay stayed with you in Rattay. And every village had its own memory and its own judgment. You were Henry the Chosen One in one town, and in another you were Henry the Thief, Henry the Bum, Henry the bloody peasant who stank of garlic and sweat. This was pure genius from the developers. By not going with a global morality system, it gave every town its own personalized identity. The town you're in doesn't know you're a mass murderer. They just think you're an honorable knight based on your clothing. The quick save button. One of the most abused safety nets in gaming. It's a safe rewind button to keep the stress away. But in Kingdom Come Deliverance, there was no quick save button, no safety net before every risky choice. If you wanted to save, you had to drink Savior Snaps, a limited item that can only be brewed or bought. That wasn't some gimmick, it was by design. The devs wanted every moment to feel like it mattered, because in real life, you don't get do-overs. That meant every fight, every crime, every decision came with real tension. Because failure didn't mean reload checkpoint, it meant live with the consequences. That's why players remember Kingdom Come Deliverance. It didn't ask you to play perfectly, it asked you to commit and deal with what came next, just like real life. In other games, side quests feel like errands. You know the drill. Kill 10 wolves, go find 5 herbs, deliver some leather for a guy you just met. But in Kingdom Come Deliverance, side quests didn't just feel like quests. They felt like stories someone forgot to write down in a history book. It felt like this because the devs didn't treat them like filler. They treated them like living records grounded in local myths, rumors, and medieval routines. You weren't saving the world, you were helping a drunk priest deliver a sermon, while both of you were still hammered. You were rigging a public execution to humiliate a man because someone else didn't get the job. This was not some algorithm churning out copy and paste tasks. The team refused to treat Immersion like a formula. Just fully written, fully voiced, handcrafted slices of medieval life. And they always gave you options. Lie to protect someone, sleep with the wrong nobleman's wife. The game didn't color code your choices because the devs believed morality shouldn't be obvious. In interviews, Dan emphasized that Kingdom Come was designed to feel grounded, not gamified. And that grounded design showed in some choices you made. That's why players loved the side quests. They weren't distractions, they were the reason to keep playing. And it wasn't just a quest, you were watching people grow. Like Sirhan's Capon, a spoiled noble brat who treated everything like a game until real violence hit him in the face. He starts off drunk, cocky, and useless, but by the end he's sword in hand, riding with you into real danger and actually learning what honor costs. Warhorse didn't write nobles as untouchable elites. They wrote them as people, torn between their titles and the reality of war. Sirhan's wasn't there for comic relief. He was a mirror showing how fast a young man has to grow when the old world falls apart. And just like the people in this world, the world itself didn't hold your hand either. Players also loved how there was no minimap, no go here trail, no glowing markers. If you wanted to find something, you had to read signs, open a map, get lost, and that was the point. This showed the world didn't exist for you, it existed despite you. And that made it feel alive. The map wasn't photorealistic, it was a parchment sketch, hand-drawn, stylized, and intentionally imprecise. Because the world of Kingdom Come Deliverance wasn't supposed to look like a satellite scan, it was supposed to feel like something you might have carried in 1403. This wasn't just a stylized choice, it was a statement. Warhorse Studios rejected the trend of hyper-realistic UI maps and instead designed something that looked like it was inked by a medieval cartographer. Roads weren't straight, buildings weren't to scale, landmarks was represented with exaggerated flair, like icons from an old manuscript. It wasn't just more immersive, it was more personal. You didn't feel like an all-seeing guide with a drone's eye view. You felt like a traveler piecing together the world with incomplete information, scribbled references, and your own memory. Warhorse even wanted you to know that fast travel had consequences. You could arrive hungry, injured, or dead tired. Every shortcut was a risk, every mile mattered, and that visual design reinforced the game's core philosophy. This wasn't a fantasy, this was survival drawn in ink, not pixels. Kingdom Come Deliverance didn't just make exploration immersive, it made getting lost feel like part of the story. Players didn't even need markers to stay engaged. They said some of the best moments weren't even quests. It was just wandering through the forest, staring at the foliage outside a village, or standing still watching the sun bleed over the horizon. Hardcore mode even brings it to another level. Oh my god. There was no icon showing where you was. You had to actually learn the landscape through memory, study road patterns, hell, even study the constellations in the sky. And I'm not joking, it actually helped. But the world didn't beg for your attention, it earned it with every step. But also in this world, you weren't just navigating space, you were racing against time. You see, in games, time is just background noise. In Kingdom Come, time was the real enemy. Ignore it and the world moved on without you. Quests had windows, characters had lives, days passed with or without your input. Sleep too long, that battle you were meant to join already happened. Fast travel wasn't instant, it cost hours. But Kingdom Come Deliverance didn't just make you feel the weight of that world, you could hear it breathing. Birds chirping at dawn, wind sweeping through trees and fields, the gentle flow of streams. None of this was random. Warhorse wanted the world to sound as real as it looked, because Immersion didn't stop at what you saw, it had to live in what you heard. And sometimes that realism bent the genre itself. Like the monastery quest. You weren't a warrior, you were an infiltrator. Your sword and armor were gone. All you had was a robe, a prayer book, and a mission. Find the bandit hiding amongst the monks. To stay hidden, you had to live their life, wake at dawn, chant at mass, copy scripture, eat gruel, Slip once, skip prayers, break routine, and suspicion grew. That disguise cracked. It wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy, but it was tense. For players who surrendered to it, the monastery felt less like an RPG quest and more like a medieval hitman mission. For players around the world, Kingdom Come Deliverance was immersive. For the Czech Republic, it was something else entirely. Tourism surged at the release. Players traveled to see the castles and towns featured in the game. The Czech Tourism Board even praised the game for showcasing the country's medieval roots. Historians and schools took notice too. Warhorse had worked directly with local experts, monasteries, museums, academics to make sure the details were right, and they were. For many Czech players, this was the first time their language, names, and real history had been shown to the world without being turned into fantasy. It wasn't just a game, it was national representation. Dan and his team were featured in Czech news, talked about on national TV, and even recognized by the government for pushing Czech culture and technology exports forward. Kingdom Come didn't just put Bohemia in a game, it made people care about it. And now all these years later, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is finally here. Bigger world, deeper systems, same brutality honestly, but it only exists because the first one shouldn't have worked, and it still did. No dragons, no chosen one, just the most unlikely RPG of its time that somehow changed the genre forever. I had a lot of fun making this video. I could have made it longer, but I don't like to fluff. I like to get to the core points. I'm definitely going to make this a format. Is there any other games you want me to cover in this style? Let me know in the comments.